Hey, Sean Phillips here. I want to welcome Ari Whitten, my guest today, to the Fit 40 Summit. Ari, welcome to the show, man.
Thanks, Sean. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's great to have you. I really appreciate you coming on. For our listeners who don't know your work right now, I want to say two of the areas we're going to talk about today, I think, is metabolism and energy. And I don't think there's two more hot topics when it comes to living over 40.
Yeah, most definitely.
Yeah, and that's, I know I found you originally working in the space of metabolism. Tell us a little about how you got into the whole metabolism thing and really how you got into this health and fitness sector as a whole.
Well, I grew up sort of idolizing, guys like you. And as a young boy, I was like, into the bodybuilding thing, and I wanted to get muscles, and I wanted to have abs and biceps and shoulders so I could get chicks. That's honestly how it started out when I was.
I think that's the most truthful statement I've ever heard about how it always starts out.
Yeah, that's how it started out for me when I was 12, 13 years old. I had an older brother who was a personal trainer at the time, and his mentor was a pro bodybuilder. And so I grew up sort of like worshiping those guys, my big brother and his mentor bodybuilder guy, and lifting weights, wanting to sort of be in that direction. And so it's really been a passion of mine ever since I was about 11, 12 years old. And I was reading, nutrition textbooks and physiology textbooks all the way back when I was 13, 14 in junior high. I was reading my brother's personal training books and stuff like that, anatomy and biomechanics and things like that. And it just has remained a passion for basically 20 years now. And I went on to get my degree in kinesiology in college, was a personal trainer for a long time, and now have branched into the online realm. And my work has gone into fat loss, gone into things related to the metabolism, as well as now the latest thing is more going at things from an energy perspective and sort of looking at the science of energy levels, all of which, obviously fat loss, energy levels, all of which relate to, metabolic function.
Yeah, metabolic function is a good way of putting it. I love the backstory, and it gets me smiling because most everybody I know who really is in this sector, who has passion for it, has about the same story, right?
Yeah.
And it's always 11 or 12, and it's always, you start this quest, right? Mm-hmm. It really is. Who was your brother's mentor in bodybuilding?
His name was Chris Martin. And, he wasn't a famous bodybuilder or anything like that. He was sort of I guess he was a guy who was, I would say on the cusp of, he was like technically a pro. He had won a show to get his pro card, but he wasn't, winning competitions or anybody famous that you would know. And I'm sure he's long since gone. Maybe 15 years ago, he went on to just give up the whole bodybuilding thing and start going into business.
Yeah. Well, I think there's so much knowledge in that tier, the people that are kind of the journeymen. And I mean, we all know them. It's funny, when I grew up myself in the ranks and started, rubbing shoulders with the more higher level pros, I found less and less information and less wisdom.
Yeah.
Largely.
I remember back at that time, I remember there was one conversation that my brother had with this guy where he was like, I found the secret to getting huge muscles. Just drop set everything. Everything is just monster drop sets. So like, I remember just doing endless drop sets of like every exercise and every workout, and just to the point of like speeding your body to shit and overtraining after like 2 weeks of working out. And I guess you can do that stuff when you're injecting yourself with massive amounts of steroids, but or you can get away with it a little bit as a teenager, but I could never get away with something like that now.
No. I mean, there's no way. I mean, it's funny. Yesterday I had a conversation with a friend of mine who's in his later 50s, and he used to be the promoter for shows when I was competing, and now he's a internationally acclaimed public speaker. He's a big time guy, But he all of a sudden he just gets telling stories. Oh no, I was training with John Defendus, and I'm like, oh man, it's just like, and these stories go on and on. You're like, it's just like, it's almost like I keep thinking of a book. It's like Crazyville, right? It's like the things we did, right?
Yeah.
You know, and it's when you could, right? So I digress, but metabolic function is what we were talking about, which we'll get back to that. So sorry for my circular, but I get so fascinated with it. You know, and you know, you and I both have some background in the study of metabolism and have done some work, and that's where I found your work. But I love this whole push you're making into the energy realm. So, you know, backing up and talking a little bit about, like, what would be some of the key things that, you know, you discovered really about metabolism and the importance of metabolism and wisdom to share around that for folks?
Well, you know, I would say that the start of it was really being in the fitness industry. So, you know, following a lot of the same guys, being friends with a lot of the same guys that you're friends with, and seeing the stuff that they're putting out there. And let me preface by saying that I massively respect all the guys in the evidence-based fitness industry. But I also perceived there to be a lot of reductionism in that realm.
Yeah, it's a great word.
Specifically around how the body regulates energy balance, how the body regulates body composition. And I saw this sort of a gap between what I saw a lot of people in that evidence-based fitness industry preaching and what a lot of obesity scientists were saying. And as much as these guys were claiming, you know, we're preaching the real true science and everybody else is a quack and, you know, saying pseudoscience, I really saw that there was a lot of the stuff that these evidence-based guys were saying was really, there was definitely truth in it, and they could cite studies to back up certain claims, but it was reductionistic. As an example, it's very common to hear in the evidence-based fitness industry, you know, fat loss is just a simple matter of calories in, calories out.
Yeah.
Okay? And all you got to do is, you know, count your calories, consciously restrict your calories, take care of your macros, boom, problem solved. It's that simple. And in one sense, I agree with them, you know, and then they're kind of saying that stance in response to a lot of the people who are like, it's insulin, it's, you know, it's the grains, it's the gluten, it's the sugar, whatever. And so I actually side with the people, you know, saying it's all calories in favor of those other people. But at the same time, you can go on like Stephan Guyenet's website, right? Stephan Guyenet is a renowned obesity researcher.
Yep.
And in you know, his probably most popular article series, it's on the body fat set point. And he's talking all about the science of the body fat set point. And then, you know, and then the conclusion to this article series, he outlines 4 specific rules of what a treatment would look like if it's going to cause sustainable fat loss. And one of the rules is it must not deliberately restrict calories. Okay. So he's saying, and the reason being that, you know, he's looking at the evidence and saying deliberate conscious attempts to forcibly restrict calories below what your body actually wants and craves doesn't result in sustainable fat loss. Will it get you fat loss, like if you're dieting down for a physique competition for 3 months? Like, can you force yourself to do it for 3 months and lose a bunch of fat, get shredded for a photo shoot or a competition? Absolutely. No one would debate that. It's very obvious that you can do that. The question is, does that approach work long-term to actually lower somebody's body fat levels permanently? Yeah. And, you know, again, this is a renowned obesity scientist, basically saying it must not involve deliberate calorie restriction. So there's this gap, right? There's this, the evidence-based fitness industry, people are saying, oh, it's all about deliberate calorie restriction. And then you look over here and these guys are going, deliberate calorie restriction doesn't work very well for lasting permanent change, like taking an overweight or obese person and making them lean forever.
Yeah.
Okay. So I was kind of like fascinated with that gap. Both of these people are claiming to be scientific and supporting studies to back their assertions, but there's a very clear gap between those two things, right?
Yeah.
So basically I went in and looked at, you know, the stuff that Stephan Guyenet was looking at to make those assertions. What's all the evidence around metabolic function, how the brain regulates energy balance? And so, yeah, calories in, calories out does matter, but it's more descriptive of what's going on and less sort of explanatory. And So what are the factors that actually drive our biology to want more calories in or to want to expend less energy? And so how can we address those factors? And so looking at sort of beneath the surface of the calories in, calories out equation, what are the hormonal and biological forces that are affecting that equation?
Well, and that, I mean, it's a fascinating discussion. I love where you're talking about getting in that gap. I go back to the word you used, reductionism, which is one that some people don't really even understand what it means. And, I mean, I get it. And I love that you understand that, either or. Really what you're saying is that there's partial truths over here, there's partial truths over here. And what we need to do is, instead of arguing these, how do we transcend this and include what is true, right?
Exactly.
So there's always a higher truth, and that higher truth is more integrated, not less integrated.
Exactly.
And go ahead, please.
No, you go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that the problem is, for people following, experts or gurus, is that when you're following someone, you'll only rise to the height, to the level that they're functioning or seeing the world at.
Yeah.
So if their worldview is, I'm Republican, Democrats suck, I'm Democrat, Republicans suck, then that's just where you're going to be. And that's as high as it's going to go. And so as long as they want to argue the pros and cons of specific diets or make believe, I used to say all the time in the old days, I said, the reason that, Body for Life was, not as popular as Atkins at some level is because, a neutral, healthy diet that's called balance is boring, while absolute restriction of one macronutrient is much more exciting.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Nobody's going to write a best-selling book now preaching, hey, the balanced diet.
Yeah, sensible eating.
Yeah, here's really sensible approach based on, the overall body of evidence. No, if you want a bestseller, you write something extreme and something that, at least on the surface, appears to be novel.
Yeah, and everything works to a degree, but it works, it's a limited degree, right?
Yep.
And I'll notice you're drinking out of a glass, right?
Yep.
Staying away from plastics and other contaminants. All right.
Yes. Yeah, and that's another example of, I really, like I said before, I'm going to preface again by saying that I really respect people in the evidence-based fitness industry, but there's a lot of in-group sort of, there's a little bit of pathological forces that I think are sort of hurting everyone to try and stay in this very reductionist paradigm. Because as soon as you move a little bit outside of that, like if I start saying right now, hey, plastics are something to be concerned with. Yeah. Immediately people in the evidence-based fitness industry are going to be like, oh, he's one of those.
Yeah, one of those, I know.
He's one of those people that's, he's not scientific. He's worried about plastics and chemicals leaching from plastics
or toxin freak. Yeah, the toxin.
Exactly.
He's gone toxic on us.
He's just like the food babe and, equally unscientific. And I'm like, no, actually, you might want to look at the scientific evidence on this subject, because actually, if you apply the same scientific rigor that you do when it comes to macros and calories and stuff like that to plastics, you'll actually find that there is evidence to suggest there's cause for concern there.
Oh, ample, considerable. But I think that's, you're talking about something extremely rational and unfamiliar to a lot of people who, really, if you look at the obsessiveness of a bodybuilder and that what they make, an obsessive bodybuilder makes for an easy customer, an easy client, and a seeker and a searcher, right? Mm-hmm. So at some level, what's used in the industry is fear and alarm state to keep people in an emotional driven state out of their higher learning and thinking centers, uninformed, and driving around a group of customers like you would chase Mercury, right?
Yep.
We just want to chase them around and keep them swirling around in the latest, greatest. And the person who says one thing will say the next thing the next month and the next thing the next month. And that's how you kind of judge what you're following. I mean, I didn't say this at the beginning of the intro, but part of the reason I want you on the show, and I know you're not 40 yet, but that's not the relevance, close enough. But the reality is what you study and what you learn. But, the reason that I have appreciated is when I found your work originally, I saw somebody doing it the way I'm like, yeah, you're bringing marketing and a wealth of stuff with integrity and a next level thinking. And I'm like, that's what That's what I respect. That's what I appreciate. That's what, I admire. I admire what you're doing. And you're doing it in a way that I want to spread that word to people and go, more like this, more like this,
I appreciate that. To speak to my intentions a little bit, there's actually a little, I'm coming from sort of the evidence-based fitness industry.
Yeah.
And so like, if I'm trying to start a business in that realm, I want to be friends with all those guys. I want to be on their good side. I want to be saying stuff that they agree with. I want to be parroting them and say, hey, Brad Schoenfield and Alan Aragon and whoever else, hey, look what I'm doing. Can you guys promote this to your list and to your following? And do you guys agree with it? Can you endorse it? Sort of thing. The reality, though, is I say some stuff that's not really parroting them and like is kind of a little bit different from them, but I'll also back up everything that I say with science. Yeah. But I'm an outsider within that community.
Yeah.
Put it that way. Like I don't say things to be included in that community. And from their end, I'm an outsider, but I'm deciding basically to go my own route and say things that I think need to be said. And if they don't want to be friends with me, that's fine, but I think it's important not just to be parroting the same voice as all these other guys and say something that's a little bit unique that needs to be said.
Beautiful. That's great. And that is, and it's, I think in a similar way, I will echo what I love they're doing well. And I'll challenge when I go, Lark, when you were talking about some of this, reductionism or, they might take a small benefit. Like one of my favorite arguments is creatine before or after a workout. What's going to be? And I'm like, oh my God, at the end, it makes no difference. You guys are acting like you're acting like a 0.1% for 3 days on a study that might have found the smallest degree of anything is significant. It's not.
Yeah.
And it's like, I use the analogy. I said, 90% of the conversation is spent around the green trying to putt the hole in the ball when 90% of the people can't get the ball on the damn green.
Yep.
Nobody's got a driver conversation.
Such a great analogy.
I mean, if you can't get the damn thing down the fairway, really, we even need to have a discussion about the green yet.
Yeah. Seriously.
So I appreciate that. And let's, taking that forward into, what did you discover around, and I love the conversation around metabolism, around energy, and around the truth of that is like let's say one of the things that comes up in discussion often is, frequent meals versus not frequent meals. And then the fasting is the way to go, or only one meal a day matters, or breakfast doesn't matter, or 6 meals is the only way.
Right. Yeah. So, there's actually some science leaning in both directions on that. Yeah. So it's possible to cherry pick in either direction and say, I'm going to look at the studies that showed no metabolic difference between 6 meals or 3 meals. I'm going to look at the studies that showed a slight advantage to 6 meals. And then it's also possible there's even a couple studies where they've done 6 meal patterns in overweight diabetic folks where they've actually shown negative effects from it. Yep. Where they've shown increased insulin resistance, less fat loss or more fat gain, as well as psychological effects, like they became preoccupied with food and they started thinking about food 24/7. When's my next meal sort of thing. Yeah. And it's really possible to cherry pick it in either direction on an issue like that.
Yeah. So how do you help clients and people find a way there?
Well, the one big thing that I perceive going on is there's so much focus around diet and exercise being the only things in existence.
Yeah.
And if you're the evidence-based fitness nutrition community, it's like, okay, diet and exercise, calories and macros, get that dialed in, do your weight training and your high intensity interval training, and optionally, depending on who you talk to, maybe some cardio. And that's it. That's like everything that exists in that world. And I'm looking at this and going, hey guys, like there's also this thing called circadian rhythm. And I know that seems like really pseudoscience-y to you, but there's actually like 1,000 studies or 2,000 studies on this topic. And we know that it's actually a huge factor that's really, really important, and that does influence body composition, that does have a massive influence on health and rates of disease. And and pretty much all of us have screwed up circadian rhythm. You know, and credit to guys like Adele Musa of Subversity, who's really been exposing stuff like this for several years, but I think nobody's really paying attention.
Or they can't read through the first paragraph, so they quit and leave.
Yeah, I mean, they're just, I think they're just interested in the stuff that's on either calories and macros or exercise. Yeah. But I mean, there's this whole other body of evidence like circadian rhythm that has impacts on hormones that regulate appetite. So how many calories your body feels compelled to eat. And so it impacts something like, so let's say you're following some, IIFYM plan, and you have your calories outlined and your macro percentages outlined. You're like, okay, I'm good to go. I have all that accounted for. Well, if your circadian rhythm is screwed up and your brain is being affected by a disrupted circadian rhythm in a way that it's changing your appetite regulation, well, you may force yourself to eat that many calories, but if that's not how much your body actually wants to eat and feels satisfied by, then you're eventually going to deviate from your plan. You're not going to be able to adhere to it. Yeah. And so it's not sustainable. So in the long run, these things start to come into play. Yes, you can consciously force yourself to do anything for a short period of time, but in the long term, these hormonal forces really matter. And then circadian rhythm also affects things like your energy level and your motivation and drive to go work out, your performance as well as your overall energy expenditure. So how many calories you burn in a day, both based on both your metabolism as well as your motivation and drive to work out, as well as your overall energy levels and compulsions towards spontaneous movement throughout the day. Yeah. And so it's affecting that calories in, calories out equation. And there's this mental block with people where they think that the calories in, calories out equation is only dictated by how many calories they decide to eat and how many they decide to burn. And really there are all these other forces acting on their biology that are changing that equation.
Well, and it's, I call it, I look at it as people think the reductionist mechanistic view of the body is that it's a machine, right? So they treat it like a machine and they act like it's a math problem to be solved when I say it's a chemistry experiment in flow and function,
Yeah, absolutely. And so the tricky part is as soon as you start going down that train of thought and you start saying, oh, it's a little more complex than calories in, calories out, they're immediately like their alarm bells or their red flags turn on and they're like, oh, he's an insulin person. He thinks it's all about insulin and or something like that. He doesn't understand that really it's all about calories. I'm like, no, it's calories matter, but there are forces that impact calories.
Yeah, that's well said. And I mean, I think that's important for people to understand is that, and you can't, and I like what you're talking about is what happens is people look at these programs, they have this mechanistic program, they have this absolutism approach to calories in, calories out, and then something happens and they fail. I used to write that about in Body for Life. They have this failure point and they take it personally. They think that they failed.
Right.
They take this whole accountability and have this big failure strategy set up when the reality is, discipline and willpower is a wonderful thing, but it's a finite resource.
Yeah.
You can't just will your way in and out of these situations. You've got to work with the flow of the whole thing. I mean, the whole system, the body, mind, and everything going on inside that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So the question that I really started from and put out work and in my first book was Forever Fat Loss. It was really all about that. It's how can, since willpower is a finite resource, and if we rely on it, most of us are destined to fail in the long term. How can we align our approach with our biology and sort of enlist those biological forces that are impacting on the calories in, calories out equation to make our efforts much more likely to succeed, since they're now in harmony with our biological and hormonal and metabolic drives instead of us fighting against our biology.
Yeah, I like that. In harmony is a great word.
Yeah.
And where is that book available right now? Where do you get
That's
that?
on Amazon.
Okay, cool.
Which actually I just checked it a couple days ago, and it's pretty cool. Don't ask me how this happened or how it's possible, but somehow my book 2 years after being published is like still in the top 10 of fat loss books on Amazon in the Kindle.
Yeah, cool.
And I mean, I'm selling next to New York Times bestsellers and people with millions of dollars of marketing behind them. And I have no idea how I'm doing it because it was a self-published book and I had no following when I launched it.
Wow.
I guess content speaks for itself.
That's a great thing. And it's a great story. And that's nice to know. It's nice to know that's possible these days with the way the systems go,
Yeah.
Everybody, I mean, it's, I'm like you, I tend to question everything, even if they're a higher level expert or whatever. I want to know what's behind their story, what's behind the motive. I question the intent on a lot of the greatest fitness books because unless I know what the story is, sometimes it's a construct to make a bestseller.
Right.
And so, it's hard, I mean, and the problem with whether it be paleo or Atkins or anything else is that everything works for a while, know? And, I used to say in the Atkins era, during the heyday of the Atkins era, people would just come up all the time. It's like, oh man, you don't get it. And it's awesome. It's so working for me. And I'd say, so what macronutrient strategy were you adhering to prior to following Atkins? And they'd just be that blank stare. And I say, well, how were you eating? And they're like, I don't know. And I'm saying, do you realize that if you brought structure to eating only chocolate cake, you'd have probably lost the same amount of weight?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if you're familiar with the rice diet.
Mm-mm.
Have you ever heard of that?
No.
It's actually a pretty famous diet. It hasn't been in vogue for a couple decades, I think.
Wow.
But I think it started back in the 1950s or 60s down at Duke University. And there's a book, you can look up a book on the subject and a lot of information online for free. But basically they just put people on an all white rice and sugar diet. And they, by basically saying you can only eat that type of food and essentially nothing else. I think there was maybe one or two other things they were allowed to eat, but they just put them on that diet and I think gave them some basic instructions on portion sizes or calories, and they lost massive amounts of weight. And they actually have a proven track record of success with this diet, and documented cases of people going from morbid obesity to extremely lean. They have all of this completely documented, and it was actually a program implemented at the university setting. So everything was documented and researched, and I mean, you can lose weight with any type of diet, from an all white rice and sugar diet to a fruitarian diet to a freaking keto carnivore diet.
Yeah, that's interesting. I can't believe I didn't know about the rice diet, but I love it. It's a great topic. And it just says something about. And then ultimately what's sustainable, beyond that. And it's, I mean, we hear all the stories from the Biggest Loser, of what happens there after the fact. And, I mean, without getting into it, I mean, that's got to be a hellish train wreck going on.
Yeah.
I mean, what's in your estimate, what's the most important things people can do to support metabolism? What can they do? What's within their power to affect their metabolic rate or metabolism?
So first of all, dial in your circadian rhythm and sleep. That's foundational stuff. In my opinion, it's just as important as diet and exercise. Mm-hmm. So prioritize that. And there's a whole, numerous strategies you can get into in terms of how to optimize your circadian rhythm and sleep. You can go as deep as you want to go into it. As deep as one can go in nutrition, you can go that deep into circadian rhythm and sleep. So that's a huge factor that's going to impact things. Weight training obviously is great for maintaining high metabolic rate. And then, there are certain nutritional aspects. I don't necessarily think it's about carbs versus fats or something to that effect, but obviously protein intake combined with resistance exercise is going to impact on that.
Yeah.
Having regular meal times and consistent meal times. So being consistent and regimented with your meal time. So there's evidence showing that irregular meal timing will affect energy burning after the meal.
Yeah.
As an example, it will also impact on one's subjective sense of energy after a meal. So how much their energy levels will dictate how compelled they feel to actually move their body or not move their body. Mm-hmm. There's a bunch of evidence around orexin, this neuropeptide in the brain that's critical in regulating energy levels. And so there's a science of how different nutrients and meal balances affect orexin, which in turn is going to affect the energy expenditure side of the equation. Now, one little bit of context that I'll point out here is the word metabolism is kind of, it gets confused in a lot of discussions, because one thing is resting metabolic rate.
Yeah.
And it turns out that resting metabolic rate is much less flexible than most of us had imagined. So for example, there's the discussion around, what do you call it? Metabolic, I'm trying to think of the term that's so objectionable. Starvation mode sort of thing.
Yeah. Metabolic and adaptation, basically.
Yeah. What's the word?
I don't know.
Metabolic burnout or something. I forget the term that's so controversial in the evidence-based community.
Yeah. I think of adrenal fatigue related kind of stuff. It's metabolic syndrome, not metabolic syndrome, but whatever.
It's like metabolic crash mode, starvation mode.
Yeah.
And the idea that one's metabolism
going to shuts
down in chronic dieters or people who get off a diet, and the metabolism slows down. Mm-hmm. Okay, so there's this big debate around, does the metabolism slow down or doesn't it? And a lot of people in the evidence-based fitness nutrition community will say, oh, that's bullshit. The starvation mode doesn't exist, and people don't actually suffer these crashes in resting metabolic rate. And here's this study and this study and this study that shows that people's resting metabolic rate remained roughly what we would expect based on their loss of fat or muscle tissue or the combination, right? You're familiar with all that?
Yes, yeah.
Okay. So then you also, on the other end of the spectrum, you have, Scott Abel or Diana Schwartzbein, who are like, no, this metabolic burnout really does exist. And, we see people all the time that have this. It's very clear that it does. There's a certain set of symptoms that we see in these people who have gone off these diets. So it turns out when you look a little deeper to get into a more nuanced level here, it's not necessarily the resting metabolic rate per se that is affected by this. Mm-hmm. So it turns out that there's actually certain metabolic adaptations that, for example, limit blood supply or nerve innervation to the muscles in that sort of starved post-diet state. And they will limit your energy expenditure during exercise. Mm-hmm. Okay, so it's not necessary. So as soon as you go to move your body, you all of a sudden perform much more poorly, and your body is wired in a way that you're going to burn off a lot less calories than you would if you were not in that state. Mm-hmm. Okay, so this is how it gets confused. It's, you have these sort of hardcore evidence-based folks who are saying the state doesn't exist, it's BS. And then you have these other people who are kind of talking about it with this word metabolism, but it's not really resting metabolic rate where you're going to observe all of those effects. It's lots of other different kinds of negative metabolic adaptation. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I think about, I love nuance. Two things come to mind. One experience I have found to be profoundly true in my own anecdotal, my experience is, I became a pretty avid road cyclist about 8 or 10 years ago. For a guy too big to ride a bike, I ride a lot, right? And so I know my numbers, I know how to ride, I understand it. And I've not sought to be a great endurance nutritionist, but I understand the value of glucose, carbs, and all this stuff. One thing I found was if I'm going to go ride in the morning, for under 2 hours, I don't need food, right?
Mhm.
If it's under 2 hours, I've got enough energy in me. But what I have found is that if I don't have glucose, if I don't put some kind of sugar in my mouth such that my brain thinks I've got energy, it will cut back my power output by 25%.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's exactly what happens. There was a recent study, you probably saw it, but I don't know how much you actually really looked at it. They looked at breakfast skipping versus having breakfast.
Yeah.
And effects on body composition. And what they showed was that there wasn't much of an effect on body composition. And so one sort of reductionist way of looking at that would be, okay, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter whether you skip breakfast or have breakfast, your body composition is going to be the same either way. So there's no science that would lend credibility to either position. In fact, when you look deeper into that study, what you find is that skipping breakfast basically caused people to sit around more and spontaneously expend less energy.
Yeah.
So, and if they would have done exercise during that period in that fasted state, their body would have been wired in a way that they would have expended less energy and performed.
Yeah. That's key, is this wired point, right? Because it's not up to me to decide how much power I'm going to put out, because I know for what my willpower and drive is, I know what my limit is. Yeah. And I can look at the data and I can know the data. And what I consistently found was if I took 4 or 5 just gummy chewables and put them in my mouth so that they started to dissolve and then chewed them up. And I mean, I might have taken 30 grams of carbs, right? Mm-hmm. That's not making a huge difference, but it's enough to tell my brain, you've got the carbohydrates to have the power, and my power goes way up.
Right.
And it's not my control. It's wired, right?
Yep. Yeah. So that's, sort of one of these layers of nuance that I feel is really neglected, and people are not talking about it and giving it enough importance. It's more like, let's reduce it down. It doesn't matter whether you eat or don't eat, your body composition is the same. That's the end effect. Like, no, actually it does matter. If you want to feel good, if you want to have high energy levels, if you want to perform well, then you probably do want to have that meal, especially if you're going to go, ride a bike or go surfing like I did this morning, as opposed to just go sit at your desk, for example. If you're going to sit at your desk right after, then, I guess it doesn't matter so much. But, there are contexts where things really matter.
Yeah, we might find too that it does something with cognition and otherwise. I mean, there's the subtle nature of it. There's something else you remind me of is I've done this as a practice over my life off and on, and had other people do it. But it came up again recently with my girlfriend Carla and I. We were doing something and we went out, had a good meal, and then took a 20-minute walk. And I'm like, if everything time after you ate something, you spent 10 minutes physically moving, it would change your experience of your food dramatically. And also, it's not like you're exercising off calories, but you're just burning enough to change the chemical nature, the chemistry of your body.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting that you bring that up. I've always been fascinated with just observing other animal species. And if you observe any animal in the wild, you see that there's this natural rhythm between moving their body and then consuming something, and then moving their body and consuming something. Yep. They don't have refrigerators and vending machines and, food available to them while they're sitting at their desk doing nothing. If they want to eat something, they got to move their body and go get it. And then if they want to eat something else, they got to move their body and go get it. So there's this rhythm. And for us humans living in the modern world, we have lost that rhythm. We no longer have to engage in that cycling of activity to acquire food and to consume food. We can just sit on our ass and consume food all day, And it's not very good for our metabolic health
and that brings me to something that I'm sure you've got great study on too, which is the intermittent fasting, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, what I like about the fasting thing, I think one of the secrets to fasting may not be what it does to you metabolically or your metabolism or it's really could be how you experience it mentally and emotionally. Because I think so many people who start with the fasting, the first thing I tell them is take 24 hours and decide what it really feels like to be hungry. You might have never known hunger in your life ever.
Yes.
True hunger.
It's actually shocking to me how many people that I deal with don't know what hunger feels like.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, it's I've been an athlete all my life. So ever since I was a little kid, I'm used to running around all day and going to play with my friends and ride bikes and skateboards and surf and whatever, for hours and hours and hours without any food.
Yeah.
And burning massive amounts of calories, no food. And then I get to the point where, like, oh man, it's the end of the day. The sun's going down. I got to get home to eat something. I'm starving, right? Like you forget about eating. Yeah. And I deal with so many people that are so used to just sitting on their butts for most of the day and always having food available to them, where they eat at the slightest feeling of, craving even a little bit of food. They're putting something in their mouth, or they're just eating because, it's 12:30. That's my time to eat something.
Yeah.
And people, it really is shocking to me how many people don't know what that feels like to be hungry. And I've even had a few people who are very, very overweight tell me when I told them to get, kind of like what you just said, to get in touch with the experience of hunger. I've had them tell me that they actually felt scared.
Yeah, scared's a good word.
They started to feel that sensation in their body, and they were like worried that they were going to starve to death or something like that.
Yeah.
And I'm like, you have 90 pounds of excess body fat.
Yeah, energy.
You have no risk of starving to death if you go 8 hours without food. I assure you, you'll be fine. Like,
yeah.
But that's how disconnected we are from more traditional humans' ways of life, where it was the norm for people to go 8 hours or 12 hours or a day without food and to feel hungry.
Yeah, and to really get in touch, if you're going 24 hours, you won't find that deep, oh my God, I'm starving to death hunger, but you'll feel some hunger. And I tell people, you got 24 hours, just label it, just look at it, whatever it is, just, that's what that is.
Yeah.
You don't have to react to it. It starts to give you some power to not react. But you were talking about the lifestyle of the active child and stuff. And I had this conversation with some friends the other day. And it's like you reflect back sometimes and you think, my God, I left the house, or we all did as kids, at whatever time in the summer, in the morning, came home at dusk. How the hell we ever got food throughout the day, if we ever did? I don't even know where it came from, right? I mean, these days you look at parents, they can't run to the store with their kids without packing extra food with them.
Yeah. Yeah. And this actually, there's an element of this that speaks to one's metabolic health. If you're metabolically healthy, you should have the capacity to do that. Mm-hmm. You should have the capacity to go for a bike ride some mornings for a couple hours without any food before it, and be able to go for a bike ride and function. Yeah. And not be like so worried about being hungry, or to just completely bonk and go hypoglycemic and faint or something like that. Yeah. And the inability to do that when people have all of these symptoms start to emerge when they skip a meal. Their body feels cold. They lose all their energy. They can't function cognitively or physically. All of those symptoms are a sign of poor metabolic health and poor mitochondrial health. And so as soon as you start to see those symptoms, you probably have some issues with mitochondrial health and metabolic flexibility.
Yeah, metabolic flexibility, great term. And you brought up mitochondria. So I'm going to bring up mitochondria because that really is where you're putting the energy blueprint. You work at the energy blueprint, which I found really fascinating. Love the videos, love the whole presentation. I love the angle. And I've been a student of mitochondria myself, not as deep as you've taken it right now, but I understand how damn critical. It's kind of like when I think about mitochondria, I think about the way I lecture people about creatine and ATP. I mean, ATP is the energy, you need it, creatine's a source. But mitochondria, if your mitochondria are not functioning, I mean, it's the pathway to premature aging, energy decline. It's a crisis, and your focus right now with the energy blueprint seems to be all about reviving that mitochondria, which really is reviving your energy, reviving your metabolism, reviving your metabolic health and your youth and your power, right?
Yep. Yeah, absolutely right. Yeah, the mitochondria are key to every aspect of our health, our longevity, our quality of life, our mood, and our mental and physical performance.
Yeah.
You know, and they really are key. And when you start to look at the factors that affect them positively or negatively, you start to see how our lifestyles are really sort of built in a way that is almost like the polar opposite of the way that they should be for good mitochondrial health. There's just so much wrong with the way that most people in the modern world live, and that really damages their mitochondrial health and affects all of those different areas of energy levels, of mood, of mental and physical performance.
So you get someone through the Energy Blueprint. I think is that a 60-day program intensive, right?
Yes.
And you're really taking them through an opportunity to really reboot their mitochondria, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, basically, there are really there's sort of two key principles to understand when it comes to energy levels, when it comes to going from a state of low energy, sort of dragging yourself through the day, fatigue, to being high energy and feeling that aliveness and vitality. And the two principles are cellular regeneration and building your cellular engine. Okay, and sort of they work in tandem to build up our mitochondrial health and our health in general. Now, if you think of factors that make us healthy. So like if I ask you the question, what makes us healthy? What are the things that humans need to do in order to be healthy?
Be strong.
Yeah, be strong, eat good, nutritious food,
yeah, yep.
Do exercise, sleep, de-stress, right? Things like that.
Yep.
Anything else you can think of?
Well, you said sleep, your hormones. I think hormones are a huge element to it. Your mental and emotional regeneration, flexible freedom, being able to flow through the world without being in chronic stress.
Right.
Stuff like that.
Yeah. So and pretty much anybody you ask is going to come up with a list similar to that on some level. And we think of all of those things as sort of the same thing. These are things that make us healthy. Eat a good diet, do exercise, sleep, things that make us healthy. And in reality, they're really operating through radically different physiological mechanisms. So I lump them into two different categories. There are things that make us healthy because they're cellular regenerators, which are like sleep, which are eating enough calories, eating enough of the different macronutrients, vitamins and minerals, things like that, de-stressing. So all of those, having a good circadian rhythm, all of those are going to affect cellular regeneration. And then on the other hand, you have things like exercise and like the whole category of hormetic stressors. So this concept called hormesis, which is basically the stressing of the body. It's a certain kind of metabolic stressor that is a transient stressor that stimulates your body to adapt and grow stronger and healthier and fitter. And so we, as much as that sounds weird, that something that's stressful would be healthy, we're actually familiar with it. Most people are familiar with it in the form of exercise. This is how exercise works. What most people don't know is that there's lots of other different kinds of hormetic stressors. So we have these two kinds of things, cellular regenerators and hormetic stressors. And those work together to make us healthy, make us strong, and make us energetic. And that's what allows you to go from fatigued to high energy mode. Now, the thing is that most people suck at both of these things. They're really, really bad at doing both of these two kinds of things. They suck at, optimal sleep and circadian rhythm habits and nutrition habits and de-stressing and with de-stressing habits and keeping their stress levels low. They're pretty bad at all those things that are needed for cellular regeneration. And then we also tend to suck with hormetic stressors. So exercise is one, but then there's a bunch of others. So as an example, heat and cold are other hormetic stressors. So in the modern world, we're almost living our entire lives indoors, where we're protected from the elements, and we rarely get exposed to significant degrees of heat or cold. Well, it turns out those are pretty massive forces when it comes to metabolic health.
Unless you go to Vegas in the summer, then you get both.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. So, you know, in the modern world, we lack this. We spend our lives indoors in temperature controlled environments, and we're indoors 95% of the time. And we avoid discomfort of all kinds, you know, when it comes to that. So those are hugely important factors when it comes to mitochondrial health. So in order to be optimally energetic and vital and healthy, you want to be oscillating between those two things. You want to be, you know, expose your body to different kinds of hormetic stressors, and then go into big time cellular regeneration. Have great sleep habits, nutrition habits, de-stressing habits, and then go and expose yourself to some other type of hormetic stressor, and then back into cellular regeneration mode.
Yeah,
right?
beautiful.
So that oscillation
yeah.
is the key to high energy levels and great mitochondrial health. The problem is, instead of doing this oscillation between those two things, most people are just like this.
Yeah.
You know, just a flat line. They suck at both of those things.
Yeah.
And the recipe for crappy energy levels, crappy mood, and lots of different kinds of health-related symptoms, and probably eventually different kinds of diseases, is being a flat line.
Flat line, yeah. Yeah, that's frightening, and that's a great point to bring up. I mean, I love, you know, what you see in all this stuff is the yin yang. You know, the you know, it's the polarity. I mean, the nature of our beingness is polarity, right? You know, the push and the recovery, the focus, intensity, and the recovery. That's what I teach in my strength training protocols, right? Which is you can only push as hard in the next set as you can recover in between them.
Yeah.
You know? So we go up, and you know, it's that polarity that you begin to stretch, and you stretch with your focus. I mean, that's you know, think about how people work. They think they can go to work in the morning and get focused for 8 or 10 hours. Doesn't happen.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the people that I interview in the Energy Blueprint program is a neuroscience expert named Mark Waldman, and he's written a bunch of books, very interesting books that you can look up on Amazon. But he's really, really big. His work really focuses around the basically brain health in terms of performance during the workday. So, you know, he's basically shown that if you don't interrupt your workday with periods of de-stressing and just breathing and, you know, letting go of your work and getting back into a place of mindfulness and hopefully joy and finding some pleasure in something, your brain sort of just goes into stress mode and starts to perform very, very poorly. So you can make a big difference in how productive you are and how well you perform just by interrupting your workday at regular intervals and going, okay, I'm going to do a 30-second, you know, period of stretching or self-massage or breathing exercises or meditation exercises or anything like that that makes you feel good, or just like joking around with a buddy and laughing a little bit is enough to reset your brain. And then, okay, now I can go back into another burst and function well.
Yeah, and that's I like, it's the sprints, right? It's the bursts, and that's just a great reminder. I mean, what was I thinking about there? But you know, I talk about that too, and I think about that with eating, right? You know, like people have this mentality because of this busyness and this compulsion for busyness, right? And so much of the compulsion for busyness, I think, reflects on people's desire to look busy. It's not productiveness; it's busyness. You know. Yeah. But if you're eating, I always say, you know, if you've lowered your nutrition to a quote unquote protein bar in between two meetings, if a tree falls in the forest and the food falls in your mouth and no one's there to receive it, did you actually eat? Right? You know, I mean, you can't actually satisfy the needs of nutrition if you're not present to it.
Yeah, it's interesting. There was a cool study I saw recently about liquid calories and satiety.
Yeah.
And, you know, I mean, I'm sure you've heard how various studies and people have claimed that liquid calories are less satiating than solid calories. Well, if you look at juices, for example, like juices or smoothies, they tend to be not very satiating per calorie. And so this is kind of suggestive of that whole liquids not being very satiating.
Yeah.
The interesting thing is there's a study where they looked at soup, which is also obviously a liquid, and people consuming this soup actually felt more satiated than with solid food. And so why is that? What could possibly be an explanation for why that is? Well, it's the difference between consuming the substance like this, versus, like this, one little teaspoon at a time, over a lengthy period of time. To eat a soup, you have to sit and be present to it. So just the simple act of doing that profoundly changes, the hormonal responses to that meal in terms of satiety. So
huge.
Yeah, so this is, again, like things that, underlying forces that impact on the calories in, calories out equation beneath the surface.
Well, it's the subtle things, and that's part of, I think, that's really the nature of our talk, which is the sneaky things in between the things that you're looking at, right? The subtle things. It's the subtle nature of what's really happening, and what you're speaking to is interesting, and I smile and laugh because when I built my full strength nutrition shake, I really looked at it. I called them the 7 light switches of satiety, right? If you don't flick the switch off, then you leave 2 switches on, you're not going to satiate. You may nourish your body, but you're not satiating, right? And one of those satiating triggers we know is the presence of nutrition or food in your mouth, the chewing, right? And really, so the salivary glands and the process, there's a certain action that has to happen in your throat to recognize I'm putting something in it, which is where I see the difference between what most people do when they do a protein shake is they mix scoops of protein in something very watery and chug it down, right? Okay, you got some protein, good for you. But you haven't triggered a satiety process. With full strength, the shake itself is so thick, it's more like almost like a gelatin. It's going to pour, right? So there's a process that it has to go through the mouth. There's a process of consuming, which is very similar to an eating. It's a shake you can't drink. You just can't drink it. You actually have to sit. And so I call it a shake break. It's a 5-minute mindfulness affirmation break called a shake break. And so you drink the shake down with the mindfulness being present to it. And that's a factor, and it's a ritual, and it's part of adding a ritual value to it. But I also totally got that you can't just put the calories in without having the triggering mechanisms.
Yeah. There was another interesting study they did with milkshakes, actually, and they sort of played a trick on people. They took the same meal replacement milkshake and labeled one like a weight loss beverage and said to people that it was 100 calories. And
I remember this one,
Yeah. And then the other one they said was like, indulgent or something like that. And they said it was really rich and fat and sugar and had 500 more calories than the other beverage. And they were the exact same thing. And they looked at people's psychological responses to it, as well as the tendency, how much they eat in the next meal and so on. And as well as the actual hormonal response to consuming that beverage. And they found profound differences on all levels, just based on how the person was thinking about that beverage.
Yeah. So the framing of what you eat, the intention of what you consume, and how you believe and what you believe it's doing for you is a part of it. I think in the integral world, they called it the hologram, right? It's the whole body of work, right? It's everything from the intention to the execution on down. And I think there's something in that. I mean, I think about it sometimes from the way, if you want to practice gratitude, you practice gratitude for the people that farmed this food, the people that brought this food to the table, right? And with some thoughtfulness. And that might be in some older cultures where they have a practice of that, right? And then yet today, so much of what is produced or what we consume is just meant to get money in somebody's pocket, get stuff off one table to another, and move it through a system. It's a system production, right? Whereas if you're drinking boxed wine or you're at a beautiful vineyard in Napa, your experience is radically different for many reasons, right?
Yeah.
And you might meet the winemaker who actually made that wine, and he'll tell you the story about what it meant and what all went into it. And there's so much passion involved. Even if you don't meet him, you're still going to drink the passion.
Yeah, absolutely. And these things, they exist in every aspect of health and fitness and body composition. You know, as an analogous sort of study to the one I just mentioned on the milkshakes, there's another one where they took two groups of people for a walk. And to one group of people, they said, you know, we're going to do some exercise right now so we can burn off calories and it's going to be really good for us and we're going to go do this workout. And the other group, they said, hey, we're going to go for this walk. It's a really scenic, beautiful walk and you guys are really going to enjoy it. Mm-hmm. And then after they did the walk, then they went and had lunch and they measured how much people consumed. And they found that the people who thought that they were doing a workout went and consumed several hundred more calories at that lunch than did the people who just thought that they were going for a pleasant walk to have fun and enjoy the sights.
Yeah.
So it's, you know, again, different forces impact that calories in, calories out equation. As another example, like this morning when I was surfing, I kind of got my butt kicked a little bit because the waves were, and people who are not surfers may have a hard time understanding this, but the waves were very close together.
Yeah.
So one after another, after another, after another, without long lulls in between the sets. So when you're paddling out to get out to where the waves are breaking, if one hits you and takes, you know, kicks your board out away from you, then you have to reel back in your board, get back on your board and start paddling again. Well, when the waves are close together, by the time you reel in your board, the next one's already hitting you. And then you reel in your board and the next one's already hitting you and so on. So it's really hard to just get out there. And then you're basically holding your breath to get under the waves and the waves kicking, rolling you around. And then you try and hop on your board for a few seconds and work really hard to paddle. And then the next one's, you know, doing it and you're holding your breath. So it's a combination of breath holds with exercise. So I was working my butt off out there and I got a really kick-ass interval workout for about 3 hours while I was out there, you know, on and off with intervals and then rests. And yet the whole time I was with my brother and we were laughing and having a good time and it was play. It wasn't a workout. And so I didn't go into it with this mentality of I'm going to get my workout and it's going to be really hard. It was more just like, hey, I'm just trying to go have some fun. And so that, you know, I don't necessarily have hard science to back this up, but I can pretty much guarantee that, like that study I just mentioned, this is going to affect things like how much food I consume later the day. It's going to affect my fatigue, my level of fatigue and motivation to do more exercise, whether I feel like I just did, you know, this workout or whether I just had a bunch of fun this morning.
Yeah,
you know?
that's cool.
Yeah,
that's
so,
cool. Go ahead.
So these things matter. And when it comes to energy levels, as an example, play is actually one of the most profoundly beneficial things that you can do to enhance your energy levels. Working out, not necessarily the best way to enhance your energy levels, but play is. And so, you know, it really, these things matter quite a lot.
Well, and it's that's a cool one. And I mean, I think play is a huge thing. I had one of our interviews and, you know, is with Mike Ryan in our summit here. And, you know, do you know Mike at all?
I don't know.
Yeah. So he's a good friend of mine. He's a trainer at Gold's up there. And Mike is just turned 50 and, you know, looks like he's 30 and's got more muscle, you know, and he's a lifelong natural, you know, athlete, right? But one of Mike's, you know, philosophies that I'm always trying to get him to really stand more with is have more damn fun.
Yes.
You know, stop acting so damn. I mean, because he works with a lot of, like The Rock and a lot of high level celebrities and stuff. And, you know, he has to get people who aren't strength athletes into shape by teaching them iron, right? So, you know, he has to make it fun. You know, let's make some fun out of this. Let's stop acting like it's suffering. It doesn't have to be suffering if it's not suffering.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a huge key to, I think, health and energy levels is how can you turn the stuff that's good for you and that supports good health and good energy levels, how can you turn it into something that you actually enjoy instead of just, these are the things that I have to go force myself to do in order to. Yeah.
Well, it's a mindset. You know James Altucher at all?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah. So I saw James the other day. He wrote something in a group I was in, but he wrote this piece and part of it was, I think it was his life philosophy. And one of them was the things he does every day, the things he does every day that he hates, right? Things I hate, right? And one of them was working out, but he gave all the reasons he does it. And I, in response to that, wrote the blog post on Medium. I said 10 reasons why you don't hate working out. Right?
I saw that. Great
Why,
post.
yeah, thanks. Yeah. But that was just at James. It was like, seriously, man, you know, it's a belief system that you've adopted that you can let go of instantly.
Yeah.
You know, I mean,
and not only that you can let go of, but you should let go of.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, as soon as you get some injury, as you get older and you get some injury, you get back pain, or you get arthritis in your knees or something like that. If you don't like working out, you're going to have a much harder time actually continuing that habit. You're going to look for an excuse to give up. Where you love it and you do it as just, this is a part of who I am and what I do because I love to do this and that's what I do. Yeah. Then, you know, you don't let little obstacles get in the way. Yeah, and it's a beingness, and I mean that's you know, that's the stage I'm at. You know, I mean I can't bench press, you know, because of a shoulder injury. I can do things that are chest related, but I mean I just look at a bench press sometimes. I'm like, God, I'd love to bench press. I mean, I would love to bench press, but you know, I'd break myself in half and end up, you know, with an arm laying on the floor, bleeding all over the place. That wouldn't help anybody. Yeah. So, but you know, you find a way, and I see that all the time in people. And this is the last age-related thing I'll get into, and I want to close up with a speed round with you because I could talk to you forever because I appreciate your content and the value here. But thanks, man. And but it's like I look at people that I see, you know, at gyms around town and stuff. I see these people, you see more of this in their 70s, right? 70s or 80s or 60s or 70s or 80s that are having to go into a gym and learn what strength training is for the first time. And I'm like, if you pick up the dumbbell for the first time at 40, at 30, at 50, I don't care what it is. The sooner that you become acclimated to what it means to physically, neurologically, and mentally move weight and move resistance, the better you're going to be for the rest of your life. For sure. You know, you don't want to learn to ride a bike at 80 for the first time just to stay alive. Yep. You know, and that stuff is always there. I mean, you know, that neurological pattern, that ability, you know, like I don't spend every day I'm in the gym in the kind of flow I was in when I was 25, but I know what it is to get in the flow state. And I know what it means to, you know, like I look at some people that I know that are in their 40s or 50s who in the last couple of years have managed to discover iron. And in this world of CrossFit and cardio movement and all these things that people can do to get quote unquote a workout, to see somebody who's not an iron trainer become familiar to the point where they actually don't want to leave their workout it just warms my heart. I'm like, oh, you know, thank God people can still find it. Yeah, absolutely. You know, so, I mean, that's, you know, that's my soapbox part. So I want to thank you for your time and being on here. I really appreciate the contribution. Where can people find your work? The best place to get you? Probably the best place is theenergyblueprint.com. Mm-hmm. And that, you know, my other work is on my website, ariwhitten.com, is more related to fat loss. Yeah. But the sort of the latest and greatest program, you know, really what I've been working on for the last few years is the energy blueprint system. And that's really the cutting edge science around how to overcome lack of energy, how to go from dragging yourself through the day and relying on caffeine to being filled with energy and vitality and having a great mood and loving your life and just having that physical energy and vitality. That's a beautiful thing. And I mean, I can't recommend it highly enough because I've studied all your videos work, and I just love what you did there. And like I said, you know, is that the shirt you wore in the video? This is not, no. No, it's close. It's close. It's a nice one. Different plaid shirt. This one's more colorful. Yeah, it's a little more colorful. The other one is a little bit more blue and kind of it wasn't pinkish, but it was a little bit blue. Yeah, I like that shirt though. I like both of them. This is a Billabong shirt. It's a surfer shirt. Yeah, awesome. I like that too. Yeah, I was going to start talking about surfing now, but I won't. I got a quick speed round I got to close with. We're just asking some questions, and it's just whatever answer you got, whatever top of head. There's no right or wrong. So, quick first question is, what's your best daily practice? My best daily practice is getting out in nature. I sometimes I feel like more like an animal than I do a human, because I honestly don't know how people function without it. Like if I sit indoors all day, I feel like crap by the end of the day. Yeah. And so for me, either getting out in the ocean or getting out into the canyons here in Southern California and taking my dog for a walk somewhere in nature at least once a day is key for me. That's like hitting the reset button for my body and brain.
Yeah, that's great. That's an excellent advice. And I have to ask, did you see the one about the guy who rescued the dog that rescued him?
Oh, the video.
Yeah. It's a beautiful story.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like whatever it takes, man.
Yes. I'm not a crier by any means, but that got me a little teary eyed. With dogs get me every time.
Yeah, yeah. I have to think what my questions are too. And my next question was, I love that video too. It's just got me. But what's an age-defying nutrition or lifestyle tip?
Probably the best one that I could give your audience here right now, brief one, would be pay attention to feeding and fasting windows. They matter. A lot of people living in the modern world put calories into their body from the moment they wake up to the moment they go to bed, or pretty close to that. And there's more and more research being done that shows that the feeding and fasting windows on a daily basis really matter to our body's ability to repair itself overnight. This process called autophagy, which is sort of cellular recycling. And there's a lot of research now showing links with cancer, and I believe that over the next 10 years there's going to be a lot more research showing links with all sorts of other diseases, and basically that the feeding and fasting windows matter. So you want to have hopefully around a 12-hour fasting window each night for that cellular self-regeneration, cell recycling process to take place.
Beautiful. That's great. I great appreciate that. How to get yourself, we talked a little bit about focus and flow and the workday and the neuroscientist interviews you were doing. How do you get yourself in a state of productivity and flow?
Actually, the thing that I mentioned earlier is probably the best example of how I do that. Mm-hmm. I have a mindfulness bell that goes off on my phone every half an hour. It's off right now because I'm doing this interview, but normally that goes off every half an hour, and that's my cue to take a break from what I'm doing and breathe and go into a meditative state, or roll on my foam roller or lacrosse balls, or just for a minute or two do some breathing exercises, do some gratitude meditations, whatever it is, but something that's going to de-stress me and put me back into a positive place so I don't get overwhelmed with the stress of the workday.
Yeah, don't get taken away from it. That's beautiful. I love that. Do you have a rumble roller?
I actually have a PVC pipe.
All right. That's even more brutal. I got to ask, this is the last question. It's easy, but I might have to think about this one. But give me a couple books that you have given to people that you think are important enough that you've given away that aren't your own books.
So I would say, first of all, anything by Alan Watts.
I love Alan Watts.
I have one of his books here right behind me. This is 3 of his books rolled into one. It's called 3, and it's The Way of Zen, Nature, Man and Women, and Psychotherapy, East and West. Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers is another one that I've given to a lot of people, by Robert Sapolsky. A recent one that I've given to people is How Not to Die by Michael Greger. Which just came out a few months ago, and I like him a lot, even though he's a vegan. I'm not a vegan. He's a vegan, and he tends to cherry pick the research in support of veganism on certain issues, which I don't care for. But at the same time, I think the foundations of what he preaches are really, really solid for preventing disease and staying healthy for a really long time.
Yeah.
There's another book called The 7 Mysteries of Life. Let me see what it is. The 7 Mysteries of Life by Guy Murchie. And it's not a well-known book, but it's probably one of the most impressive books that I've ever read.
Wow.
I mean, honestly, this thing is like insane to me that one person is capable of producing something like this, because this guy managed to synthesize so much science in so many different fields and put it all together in a way that is so eloquent and so, I mean, it's like he conveys the miraculousness of the universe and of life on this planet in a way that I've never seen anybody else do. And by pulling together all of these different areas of science and just wrapping it up in this beautiful writing that just gets you in that headspace of like, wow, this place is freaking amazing.
Well, that's I tell you, that's worth the wait of the whole damn interview. You got a book that I actually don't know. I love that. That's awesome. I'm excited. I'm gonna pick that baby up. I got to say, go back to Alan Watts. I just love it. You ever catch his stuff on YouTube?
Yeah, absolutely. I went through a phase for probably 3 or 4 years where I was just listening to hours of Alan Watts every day, audio and YouTube stuff. And yeah, I love Alan Watts.
Different but similar feeling, as I have done more than my own dose of Eckhart Tolle, right? Mm-hmm. And always in audio form. I don't love most of his writing, but I love his speaking. Mm-hmm. You know, so interesting stuff. But thank you, Ari. It was a great pleasure to have you on the summit, man. Awesome. And just valuable stuff. And I really will have links up and share all your stuff. And I appreciate it, man. You have a good day. All right.
You too, Sean. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks, bud. Appreciate it. Stop.